The elevator doors opened on the 23rd floor, and Paige Ferguson stepped out carrying a stack of folders that represented every business owner in the building who was about to lose everything. She had spent 3 days gathering signatures, compiling lease agreements, and documenting every promise the previous landlord had made before he sold the building out from under them without warning. Her ceramic studio was on the 14th floor, and she had poured 5 years of sweat and savings into making it a thriving business that employed 8 people and served hundreds of students. Now some billionaire had purchased the entire building, and rumor had it he planned to gut it and turn it into luxury condos. Not if she had anything to say about it. The receptionist looked up with practiced politeness as Paige marched toward the desk. "I need to see whoever is in charge," Paige said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Right now." "Do you have an appointment?" the woman asked, already knowing the answer. "No, but I have 37 business owners who are about to be displaced, and I have documentation proving we have legal protections that your boss apparently thinks he can ignore." Paige set the folders down on the desk with enough force to make her point without being rude. "So he can either see me now, or he can see me in court on Monday morning." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. She picked up the phone and spoke in low tones before looking back at Paige. "Mr. Turner will see you, through those doors, last office on the right." Paige picked up her folders and walked down the hallway, her heart pounding. She had practiced her speech 100 times, had anticipated every counterargument. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped into an enormous office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. And standing at those windows, his back to her, was a man in a dark suit with his hands in his pockets. "Mr. Turner, I presume," Paige said, not waiting for an invitation to speak. "I represent the business owners in this building, and we are not going anywhere without a fight." He turned around slowly, and Paige felt her prepared speech falter for just a moment. Warren Turner was younger than she expected, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and sharp features that belonged on a movie screen rather than in a corporate office. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray, and they studied her with an intensity that made her grip her folders tighter. "Miss Ferguson," he said, and his voice was deeper than she anticipated. "Please sit down." "I would rather stand," Paige replied. "This will not take long. I have documentation here proving that our leases contain clauses that protect us from eviction due to sale of the property. We also have evidence that the previous owner made verbal commitments that would hold up in court. Furthermore, the economic impact study I have compiled shows that displacing our businesses would harm the local economy and violate several city ordinances regarding small business protection." Warren walked to his desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "You have done your homework." "I have done more than homework. I have built a business from nothing, and I am not about to let someone with too much money and too little conscience destroy it because he wants to add another building to his portfolio." Paige stepped forward and placed the folders on his desk. "So here is what is going to happen. You are going to honor our leases, or you are going to buy us out at fair market value plus relocation costs and compensation for lost income during the transition. Those are your options." Warren picked up one of the folders and flipped through it. His expression remained neutral, which only irritated Paige more. She had expected anger or dismissiveness, something she could fight against. This calm analysis felt like being disarmed before she had even fired her first shot. "You run a ceramic studio," he said, still looking at the documents. "Paige's Pottery. 8 employees, plus you teach classes 3 nights a week and on Saturdays. Average annual revenue of $400,000, but your profit margin is thin because you keep your class prices low to make them accessible." He looked up at her. You turned down a corporate partnership last year that would have tripled your revenue because they wanted you to stop offering community classes. Paige felt her stomach drop. How do you know that? I make it my business to know what I am buying, Warren said. He closed the folder and set it down. I also know that your lease is up for renewal in 4 months, and the previous owner was planning to raise your rent by 40%, which would have forced you to either close or make changes you did not want to make. That is not true, Paige said, but even as the words left her mouth, she realized she had no way of knowing what the previous owner had planned. She had been negotiating with his property manager, who had been reassuring but vague about the renewal terms. It is true, Warren said quietly. I have his internal emails. He was going to push out everyone who could not afford the increase and bring in higher-paying commercial tenants. I bought this building 3 weeks ago to prevent that from happening. Paige stared at him, trying to process this information. That makes no sense. Why would a billionaire care about protecting small business owners? What is the catch? Warren pushed away from the desk and walked back to the windows. For a long moment, he did not speak, and Paige found herself studying his profile, the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as if he was deciding how much to reveal. My mother was a seamstress, he finally said. She ran a small alteration shop in a building not unlike this one. When I was 12, the building was sold to a developer who tripled her rent. She tried to fight it, but she did not have the resources or the knowledge to navigate the legal system. We lost everything. She ended up working in a factory for minimum wage, and she died 5 years later from a heart attack brought on by stress and overwork. She was 43 years old. The anger that had been fueling Paige began to shift into something more complicated. She walked closer to where Warren stood, still clutching one of her folders like a shield. I am sorry about your mother, but that does not explain what you plan to do with this building. Warren turned to face her. I plan to renovate it properly, fix the infrastructure that has been neglected for years, and offer reasonable lease renewals to every current tenant who wants to stay. Then I am going to add affordable studio spaces on the floors that are currently vacant and offer them to artists and small business owners who are being priced out of other neighborhoods. Why? Paige asked, searching his face for any sign of deception. What do you get out of it? A building that actually functions as a community asset instead of just a revenue stream, Warren said. And perhaps the satisfaction of proving that you can make money and do the right thing at the same time. Paige wanted to believe him, but she had learned the hard way that people with money made promises easily and broke them just as easily. Words are cheap, Mr. Turner. I need guarantees in writing. Then sit down, Warren said, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. And let us go through every concern you have until you are satisfied. Paige hesitated, then took a seat. Warren moved to his side of the desk and pulled out a laptop. For the next hour, they went through her documentation point by point. He answered every question, showed her renovation plans that actually improved the building without displacing anyone, and pulled up lease agreements that locked in rent increases at the rate of inflation for 5 years with an option to extend. What about the other tenants? Paige asked, flipping through a proposed lease agreement that was far more favorable than her current one. How do I know you are offering them the same deal? You do not, Warren said. Unless I hire you to help me coordinate with them. Paige looked up sharply. What? You spent 3 days gathering signatures and building consensus among people who normally compete with each other for foot traffic and customers. That takes skill and credibility. I need someone who understands the community in this building and can help me communicate with tenants in a way that builds trust rather than suspicion. I am offering you a consulting contract, 6 months, with the option to extend if we both feel it is working. I run a pottery studio, Paige said. I am not a consultant. You are a business owner who just walked into my office prepared to take on a billionaire with nothing but paperwork and determination, Warren said, and something that might have been admiration flickered in his eyes. That is exactly the kind of person I need. Paige sat back in her chair, trying to make sense of the last hour. She had come up here ready for a fight, armed with righteous anger and worst-case scenarios. Instead, she was sitting across from a man who seemed to actually care about the same things she did, and she had no idea how to process that. I need to think about it, she said finally. Fair enough, Warren replied. He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. That is my personal cell phone. Call me when you have decided. In the meantime, I am having my attorney draw up the lease renewals we discussed. You can review them and share them with the other tenants. Paige took the card, her fingers brushing against his for just a moment. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she pulled her hand back quickly. Thank you for your time, Mr. Turner. Warren, he said. If we are going to be working together, you should call me Warren. I have not agreed to work with you yet, Paige pointed out. But you will, Warren said, and this time there was a hint of a smile on his face. Because you are too curious to walk away now, and because you know I am right about what this building needs. Paige stood up, gathering her folders even though most of them were now obsolete. You are very confident. I am very good at reading people, Warren corrected. And you, Paige Ferguson, are someone who cares more about doing what is right than about protecting your pride. You came up here to fight for your community, and I am giving you a way to do that more effectively than you could have managed on your own. Paige wanted to argue, but he was right, and they both knew it. I will call you, she said instead, and walked out of the office before he could see how much his words had affected her. The elevator ride down felt surreal. Paige looked at her folders full of battle plans that were no longer necessary, and the business card with Warren Turner's phone number written in confident, angular script. She had come up here prepared to fight a villain, and had found something far more complicated instead. When she got back to her studio, her assistant Mara looked up from the kiln she was monitoring. How did it go? Do we need to start packing? No, Paige said slowly. I think we are going to be okay, but I need to talk to everyone. She spent the rest of the afternoon calling the other business owners, explaining what had happened in a way that made sense, even though she was still processing it herself. Most of them were cautiously optimistic, though a few remained suspicious. They agreed to wait and see what the actual lease agreements looked like before making any final judgments. That evening, after her last class had ended, and her students had filed out with their newly thrown pots wrapped carefully in plastic, Paige sat at her wheel and tried to center a lump of clay. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about Warren Turner standing at those windows, talking about his mother with a rawness that had caught her off guard. She thought about the way he had looked at her, as if he was seeing something more than just an angry tenant making demands. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Just wanted to confirm you got home safely. Warren. Paige stared at the message, her clay-covered hands hovering over the phone. It was a simple courtesy, nothing more, but something about it felt personal in a way that made her nervous. She wiped her hands on a towel and typed back, I am fine, still thinking about your offer. The response came almost immediately. Take your time, but if you want to discuss it over dinner, I know a place that makes the best dumplings in the city. Paige felt her pulse quicken. This was not a business discussion anymore, or at least not only a business discussion. She knew she should decline, should keep things professional until she understood what Warren really wanted from her. But she found herself typing, "Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, I will pick you up." Paige sent him her address and then sat staring at her phone, wondering what she had just agreed to. This was a terrible idea. Warren Turner was a billionaire who had just bought her building, and she was a small business owner who made pottery and taught teenagers how to sinter clay. They existed in completely different worlds. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she could still see the look on his face when he talked about his mother, the genuine anger at the injustice that had destroyed his family. The next day passed in a blur of classes and glazing sessions. Paige changed her outfit 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a soft green sweater that Mara had once told her brought out the color of her eyes. She felt ridiculous for caring what she looked like, but she could not seem to help herself. Warren arrived exactly at 7, driving a dark blue sedan that was expensive but not ostentatious. He got out and came to her door, which surprised her. She had expected him to just text that he was outside. "You look lovely," he said when she opened the door, and the sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm. "Thank you," Paige replied. "You said something about dumplings." The restaurant was in a neighborhood Paige had never explored, tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore. From the outside, it looked like nothing special, but inside it was warm and crowded, filled with the sound of conversation in multiple languages and the smell of garlic and ginger. "This is my favorite place in the city," Warren said as they were led to a small table near the back. "My assistant brought me here when I first moved to town, and I have been coming ever since." They ordered dumplings and noodles and spring rolls, and Warren asked her questions about her pottery, about how she had gotten started, about what she loved about teaching. Paige found herself talking more than she usually did, explaining how she had discovered clay in a college art class and had known immediately that she had found her calling. "It is the only time my brain gets quiet," she said, twirling noodles around her chopsticks. "When I am at the wheel, everything else disappears. It is just me and the clay and the possibility of creating something beautiful from nothing." Warren listened with an attention that felt rare in Paige's experience. He did not interrupt or try to one-up her stories with his own. He just listened, his gray eyes focused on her face, occasionally asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested. "What about you?" Paige asked finally. "How does someone go from losing everything at 12 to becoming a billionaire?" Warren's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Scholarships, student loans, and an unhealthy amount of ambition. I studied finance and real estate, worked 16-hour days for years, and made some smart investments at the right time. By the time I was 25, I had enough money to start buying properties. By 30, I had more money than I knew what to do with. And now you are buying buildings to save small businesses," Paige said. "That seems like a strange way to maximize profit." "I am not interested in maximizing profit anymore," Warren said quietly. "I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. What I want now is to use what I have to change the systems that crush people like my mother, like you, if things had gone differently." Paige felt something shift in her chest. "You really mean that, do not you?" "I do," Warren said. "I know I come across as just another rich guy playing philanthropist, but I am not interested in putting my name on a building or getting tax write-offs. I want to actually change things in a way that matters." "Then I will take your consulting job," Paige said, making the decision in that moment. "On one condition. Name it. You let me challenge you when I think you are wrong. No ego, no pulling rank because you are the billionaire and I am the pottery teacher. If we are going to do this, we do it as equals." Warren extended his hand across the table. "Deal." Paige shook his hand, and again she felt that jolt of electricity where their skin touched. This time, Warren seemed to feel it too, because his grip lingered a moment longer than necessary before he let go. They talked for another 2 hours, until the restaurant was closing and the staff was politely stacking chairs around them. Warren drove her home, and they sat in his car outside her apartment building, neither of them quite ready to end the evening. "Thank you for dinner," Paige said. "And for listening to my speech about Clay. I know it probably sounded ridiculous." "It did not sound ridiculous at all," Warren said. "It sounded like someone talking about something they love, and that is never ridiculous." Paige looked at him in the dim light of the car, at the way the street lamp cast shadows across his face. "Why do I feel like this is not just about business anymore?" Warren was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful. "Because it is not, at least not for me. But I do not want you to feel pressured. If you want to keep this strictly professional, I will respect that." Paige's heart was racing. The smart thing would be to agree to keep boundaries in place to protect herself from the inevitable complications. But when she looked at Warren, she saw not just the billionaire who had bought her building, but the man who had lost his mother and had spent his life trying to prevent others from experiencing that same loss. She saw someone who listened and asked questions and made her feel like what she had to say mattered. "I do not want to keep it strictly professional," she said, surprising herself with her honesty. "But I need us to take this slowly. I need to know this is real and not just some fantasy that will fall apart when we have to deal with actual life." Warren smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Paige's breath catch. "Slow I can do. How about we start with you letting me take you to dinner again?" "I would like that," Paige said. She got out of the car and walked to her door, turning to wave before going inside. Warren waited until she was safely in the building before driving away, and Paige stood in her apartment with her back against the door, feeling like her entire life had just shifted direction. Over the next few weeks, Paige settled into her role as consultant for the building. She met with tenants, reviewed renovation plans, and worked with Warren's team to address concerns as they arose. She also had dinner with Warren 3 more times, each date feeling easier and more natural than the last. They talked about everything from their childhoods, to their favorite books, to their opinions on the best pizza in the city. Warren told her about the pressure of running a company with thousands of employees, and Paige told him about the terror and joy of teaching someone to create something with their own hands. One evening, Warren showed up at her studio after her last class had ended. "I have a proposition for you," he said, leaning against the doorframe in a way that made Paige very aware of how good he looked in a simple shirt and jeans. "Should I be nervous?" Paige asked, washing clay from her hands at the sink. "Come work on one of your pieces," Warren said. "I want to see you at your wheel." Paige dried her hands and turned to face him. "Why?" "Because you talk about it like it is magic, and I want to understand what you see when you are creating something." Paige felt exposed by the request in a way that surprised her. Throwing pottery was intimate for her, a space where she let down all her guards and just existed in the moment. Letting Warren into that space felt significant, but she found herself nodding and walking to her wheel. She centered a fresh ball of clay and began to work, her hands moving with practiced confidence. Warren pulled up a stool and watched, and Paige felt hyper-aware of his presence, of his eyes on her hands, on the clay taking shape beneath her fingers. "Tell me what you are thinking," Warren said quietly. "I am thinking about balance," Paige said, her voice falling into the meditative rhythm that accompanied her work. "About how you have to apply just the right amount of pressure to shape the clay without collapsing it. Too much force and it falls apart. Too little and it never becomes anything more than a shapeless lump. You have to find that perfect middle ground where your intention and the clay's natural properties work together. Like people, Warren said. Paige looked up at him, her hands still working automatically. What do you mean? You cannot force people to be what you want them to be. You have to work with who they already are and help them become the best version of that. That is surprisingly insightful for a billionaire, Paige said with a small smile. I have my moments, Warren replied. Can I try? Paige hesitated, then nodded and moved aside. Warren took her place at the wheel and Paige stood behind him, guiding his hands onto the spinning clay. She had to lean close, her chest against his back, her arms reaching around to position his fingers correctly. She could feel his heart beating, could smell the clean scent of his soap. Gentle pressure, she murmured, her lips near his ear. Let the clay guide you. Warren's hands were larger than hers, more callous than she expected. He pressed too hard and the clay wobbled, and Paige covered his hands with hers, steadying them. Together they brought the clay back to center, and Paige felt Warren relax against her. This is harder than it looks, he said. Everything worth doing is, Paige replied. They worked together for a few more minutes before the clay collapsed completely, and Warren laughed, a genuine sound of delight that made Paige grin. She helped him clean the clay off his hands, and when they were standing at the sink together, Warren turned to her. I am falling for you, he said simply. I know it is fast and probably crazy, but I need you to know. Paige felt her breath catch. She wanted to say something clever or cautious, but what came out was the truth. I am falling for you too, and it terrifies me. Why? Warren asked, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Because you live in a different world than I do. Because I do not know how to be with someone who has the kind of money and power you have. Because I am afraid I will lose myself trying to fit into your life. Warren's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. I do not want you to fit into my life, Paige. I want to build a life that fits both of us. And I am just as terrified as you are, if that helps. I have never felt this way about anyone, and I have no idea how not to mess it up. Paige laughed, a shaky sound that was half nerves and half relief. We are quite a pair. We are, Warren agreed, and then he kissed her. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking whatever fragile thing was building between them. But then Paige's hands came up to tangle in Warren's hair, and he pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt inevitable and right. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Paige rested her forehead against Warren's chest. This is really happening, she said. This is really happening, Warren confirmed, his arms wrapped securely around her. They stood like that for a long moment, and Paige felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that had been missing from every other relationship she had tried to build. This was different. Warren was different. They were different together. Over the next several months, Paige and Warren navigated what it meant to build a relationship across their very different worlds. Warren took her to charity galas where she wore borrowed dresses and made small talk with people who had more money than entire countries. Paige brought Warren to pottery classes where he got clay under his fingernails and learned to laugh at his lopsided bowls. They had their first fight when Warren tried to give her money to expand her studio without consulting her first, and Paige had to explain that she needed to be a partner in decisions that affected her business, not just a recipient of his generosity. Warren listened and apologized, and never made that mistake again. They had their second fight when Paige refused to let Warren pay for a vacation because she wanted to contribute equally, and Warren had to learn that Paige's independence was not something to be worked around but something to be respected. Paige learned that Warren's instinct to fix things came from a place of love, not control, and that sometimes letting him help was its own kind of gift. 6 months after their first dinner, Warren invited Paige to his penthouse apartment for the first time. She had been curious about where he lived, but Warren had seemed reluctant to show her, always suggesting they meet at her place or somewhere neutral. When she finally walked into the space, she understood why. The apartment was beautiful in an impersonal way. All clean lines and expensive furniture that looked like it had been selected by a designer rather than someone who actually lived there. There were no photos on the walls, no books on the shelves, nothing that spoke to who Warren actually was. "This is where you live?" Paige asked, turning in a slow circle. Warren had his hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "I do not spend much time here. It is more like a place I sleep between work." Paige walked to the windows and looked out at the view of the city. "Do you even like it here?" "Honestly, no," Warren admitted. "I bought it because it was what successful people were supposed to have, but it has never felt like home." Paige turned to face him. "Where does feel like home?" Warren crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "Wherever you are." It was a cheesy line, the kind of thing that should have made Paige roll her eyes. But the way Warren said it, with complete sincerity and a vulnerability that he rarely showed, made her heart ache. "Then let us make this place feel like home," Paige said. "Let me help you turn it into somewhere you actually want to be." Over the next few weeks, Paige helped Warren redecorate. They hung photos from his childhood, the few he still had of his mother. They filled the shelves with books Warren actually wanted to read and pottery pieces that Paige's students had made. They bought comfortable furniture that invited you to sit rather than just look. Slowly, the apartment transformed from a showplace into a home, and Warren began spending more time there. Inviting Paige over for dinners he cooked himself and lazy Sunday mornings reading the paper together. 1 year after they met, Warren took Paige back to the restaurant where they had their first date. They ordered the same dumplings and noodles, and they talked about how much had changed in 12 months. The building renovations were complete, and every tenant had renewed their lease. Paige's studio had expanded into one of the newly renovated spaces, and she had hired 3 more employees to keep up with demand. Warren had started a fund to help other small business owners, using his wealth to prevent the kind of displacement that had destroyed his mother. "I have something for you," Warren said as they were finishing their meal. He pulled out a small box and Paige's heart began to race. "Warren," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Open it," he urged. Inside the box was not a ring but a key. Paige looked up at him, confused. "It is a key to my apartment," Warren explained. "I know it is not a proposal, and I know we said we would take things slow, but I want you to have it. I want you to know that my home is your home, and I want to wake up next to you more mornings than not. Move in with me, Paige. Let us build this life together." Paige felt tears prick at her eyes. "That is a pretty big step." "I know," Warren said. "And if you are not ready, I understand, but I am ready, Paige. I am ready for all of it. You have changed my life in ways I did not know were possible, and I do not want to spend another day not giving this everything I have." Paige thought about her small apartment that she had loved for its independence and affordability. She thought about Warren's penthouse that they had transformed together into something that reflected both of them. She thought about waking up every morning to Warren's face and falling asleep every night in his arms. "Yes," she said, "I will move in with you." Warren's face broke into the widest smile Paige had ever seen. He stood up and pulled her to her feet, kissing her right there in the middle of the restaurant, to a smattering of applause from nearby diners who had clearly been eavesdropping. Moving in together brought new challenges and new joys. They learned each other's morning routines and pet peeves, and the specific ways they needed space and closeness. Paige discovered that Warren was an early riser who liked to work out before dawn, while Warren learned that Paige was not fully functional until she had her second cup of coffee. They figured out how to share space, how to compromise on everything from what temperature to keep the apartment to how to load the dishwasher. They also figured out how to support each other's careers. Warren attended every one of Paige's student exhibitions, buying pieces and introducing potential customers. Paige learned about real estate development and began advising Warren on other properties he was considering, helping him identify buildings where he could make a real difference. They became partners in the truest sense, each making the other stronger and better. 2 years after they met, Warren did propose, this time with a ring. He did it at Paige's studio, after one of her classes had ended, with clay under both their fingernails, and surrounded by the pottery wheels and kilns that had brought them together in a roundabout way. He got down on one knee on the concrete floor and told Paige that she was the center that kept his world from spinning out of control, the steady hands that shaped him into someone better than he had been before. Paige said yes before he even finished asking, and they were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the restaurant where they had their first date. The owner closed the place for the evening, and they were surrounded by the people who mattered most to them. Paige's employees and students, Warren's small circle of trusted friends, and the tenants from the building who had become like family. During the ceremony, Paige looked at Warren and thought about how she had marched into his office ready for battle, armed with nothing but righteous anger and a stack of folders. She thought about how she had left hours later disarmed and disoriented, her certainty shaken by a man who saw her not as an obstacle but as a partner. She thought about all the moments that had led them here, all the conversations and compromises and kisses and fights that had built something stronger than either of them could have created alone. "I love you," she whispered as they exchanged rings. "I love you too," Warren whispered back. "Thank you for fighting for us." "Thank you for being worth fighting for," Paige replied. They spent their honeymoon in a small coastal town, staying in a cabin where Paige taught Warren advanced pottery techniques, and Warren taught Paige how to surf. They came back tanned and happy and ready to start the next chapter of their lives together. 3 years after they met, Paige found out she was pregnant. She told Warren by making him a ceramic mug with "World's Best Dad" carved into the side. Warren had stared at it for a full minute before understanding dawned, and then he had swept Paige into his arms and spun her around the kitchen, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. Their daughter, Emma, was born on a snowy January morning, small and perfect and absolutely terrifying. Warren held her with a gentleness that made Paige's heart ache, and she knew he was thinking about his mother, about all the moments she had missed, and all the love she had poured into him in the short time they had together. "She would have loved to meet her," Paige said softly, watching Warren cradle their daughter. "She would have loved you," Warren replied, "and she would have been so grateful that you saw past my money to the person I was trying to be." "You make it sound like I did you a favor," Paige said. "You are the one who changed my life." "We changed each other," Warren said, looking up from Emma's sleeping face. "That is what love does." Paige settled into her role as a mother while still running her studio, and Warren adjusted his schedule to be home more, delegating responsibilities so he could be present for the moments that mattered. They were exhausted and happy and sometimes overwhelmed, but they were in it together, partners in every sense of the word. When Emma was 2, they had a son they named Henry, and their family felt complete. The penthouse apartment, which had once been a sterile showplace, was now filled with toys and laughter, and the beautiful chaos of family life. Paige's pottery lined the shelves alongside children's books and family photos, and Warren's office had been converted into a playroom because being a father mattered more than having a home workspace. 5 years after they met, Paige and Warren stood together at the building where it had all started, at a ceremony marking its designation as a historical landmark and model for sustainable urban development. The mayor gave a speech about how the building represented what was possible when people chose community over profit, and Warren held Paige's hand and whispered that none of it would have happened without her. "You are the one who bought the building," Paige whispered back. "You are the one who taught me what it could become," Warren replied. After the ceremony, they went back to the studio where Paige still taught classes 3 nights a week. Emma and Henry were with Warren's assistant, who had become like an aunt to them, giving Paige and Warren a rare evening alone. They stood in the empty studio, and Paige pulled Warren to her pottery wheel. "Remember when you tried to throw your first pot?" she asked. "I remember it collapsing spectacularly," Warren said with a grin. "Want to try again?" They worked together at the wheel, their hands moving in sync now, creating something that was neither perfectly symmetrical nor entirely shapeless, but something in between, something that bore the marks of both their influences. When they finished, they had a slightly lopsided bowl that would never win any awards, but that represented everything they had built together. "It is perfect," Warren said. "It is us," Paige agreed. They fired the bowl and glazed it together, and it took a place of honor in their apartment, a reminder of the night Paige had stormed into Warren's office ready to fight and had left hours later with her defenses disarmed, her heart open to possibilities she had never imagined. It was a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come not from getting what you thought you wanted, but from being open to what you actually needed. 10 years after they met, Paige and Warren renewed their vows in the same restaurant, this time with Emma and Henry standing beside them as witnesses. The kids were old enough to understand the significance of the moment, and Emma, who had inherited her mother's love of clay and her father's head for business, read a poem she had written about how love was like pottery, requiring patience and pressure and the willingness to start over when things fell apart. "Your daughter is wise beyond her years," Warren said as they danced together after the ceremony, Emma and Henry playing with the other kids in the corner. "She gets that from you," Paige said. "She gets her creativity from you," Warren countered. "How about we just agree she gets the best of both of us?" Paige suggested. "Deal," Warren said and kissed her. As the evening wound down and they prepared to go home to their beautifully chaotic life, Paige thought about the woman she had been a decade ago, walking into a billionaire's office with nothing but determination and desperation. She thought about how terrified she had been of losing everything she had built, not realizing that what waited on the other side of that fear was not loss but transformation. Warren had not taken anything from her. He had given her partnership and love and a life bigger than she had dared to imagine. And she had given him something too: a home, a family, and the understanding that wealth meant nothing if you did not use it to build something that mattered. They drove home through the city streets, past the building where it had all started, past Paige's studio, where tomorrow she would teach a new group of students the magic of turning shapeless clay into something beautiful. Warren reached over and took her hand, and Paige squeezed back, a silent conversation that needed no words. When they got home, they paid the babysitter and checked on the kids, who were both sound asleep in their beds. Then they went to their own room, where Paige kicked off her heels and Warren loosened his tie, and they got ready for bed with the comfortable efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times before. "Best day," Warren said as they climbed under the covers. "Every day with you is the best day," Paige replied, settling into his arms. "Even that first day when you came into my office ready to destroy me?" Warren asked. "Especially that day," Paige said, "because that was the day I met the man who would change my life." "I love you, Paige Turner," Warren said. "I love you too, Warren Turner," Paige replied. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, their lives intertwined in ways that neither could have predicted but both had chosen every day since. Outside their window, the city continued its endless movement, full of people fighting their own battles, making their own choices, building their own lives. But inside their home, in the quiet darkness, there was only peace and love and the knowledge that sometimes the best thing you can do is walk into a room ready to fight and leave hours later willing to trust. Paige had gone up to that office expecting a villain and found instead a partner. She had been prepared to lose everything and had gained more than she knew existed. She had climbed those stairs with her defenses up and her weapons ready, and she had come back down disarmed in the best possible way, her heart open to a man who saw her not as an obstacle but as an equal, not as a problem but as a solution. Their story was not a fairy tale where a prince rescued a princess. It was better than that. It was a story of two people who met at exactly the right moment, who challenged each other and chose each other and built something together that was stronger than either of them alone. It was a story about fighting for what mattered and being willing to change when you discovered that what you thought you wanted was not as good as what you actually needed. And it was a story that was still being written, every morning when they woke up together, every evening when they gathered around the dinner table with their children, every moment when they chose each other again and again. Because that was what love was in the end. Not the absence of conflict, but the commitment to work through it. Not the fairy tale, but the real, messy, beautiful process of building a life with another person, and trusting that what you created together would be worth every challenge along the way. Paige Ferguson had walked into Warren Turner's office ready for war, and she had walked out a few hours later with her heart in her hands, offered to a man who had proven himself worthy of it. It was the best decision she had ever made, and as she drifted off to sleep in Warren's arms, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built, she knew she would make it again in a heartbeat.